We've talked about different kinds of interest rates and how they can be quoted and how we can do calculations with them. But there's something important we need to talk about when we contemplate interest rates. We need to talk about the structure of interest rates. The structure of interest rates refers to the pattern of interest rates, or how they change in response to changes in some variable. For example, one of the variables that can influence the level of interest rates is credit risk, the likelihood that the person who's borrowed the money will default. The structure of interest rates that we're interested in is called the term structure of interest rates. So specifically, it's the pattern of interest rates, or how they change in response to changes in the term to maturity. The term structure of interest rates is often depicted graphically using something called a yield curve. The yield curve has the interest rate on the vertical axis and the term to maturity on the horizontal axis. Typically, it will cover from short term to medium term to long term. Two important things to be noted. The yield curve shows the interest rate, or the yield, that is currently available for otherwise identical securities with different maturities. So the first part of that sentence is saying that the yield curve is not trying to tell you anything about what might happen in the future. Maybe we can learn something about the future. We'll cover that in the next module. But the yield curve is expressly plotting interest rates, or yields, which means the same thing, that are currently available. What interest rate you will get for a short-term investment, or a medium-term investment, or a long-term investment. The other point to note is that they must be otherwise identical securities. Yield curves are typically plotted for example, government bonds, because they are all exactly the same except for the yield to maturity. If you try to include different kinds of securities, different kinds of investments in the same yield curve, the information that it provides would be meaningless. Yield curves can take on a variety of shapes. The most common shape is an upward sloping yield curve, and for that reason an upward sloping yield curve is referred to as a positive yield curve or as a normal yield curve. Just because that is the most common doesn't mean it always occurs. For example, if there's little or no change between short, medium and long-term maturities, then we would describe the yield curve as flat. Long-term interest rates are lower than short-term interest rates, and this is referred to as negative because it's downward sloping, or inverse because it's the opposite of a normal yield curve. Various other shapes are possible. There could be various humps or twists. Generally that's because interest rates are changing, or expectations about interest rates are changing.